إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. In this lecture then, insha'Allah ta'ala, we're going to do some reading from the book of Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, the book that is famously known as Al-Jawab al-Kafi, but otherwise famously known as, anybody? Straight into the thick of it, straight into the questions, straight into everybody's attention. Al-Jawab al-Kafi of Ibn al-Qayyim, sometimes it is known as with another title. So what is the other title, the popular title of this book sometimes? Ad-Da' wad-Dawa', and it is the book, I think, which is being published in English soon as well. So in this book there is a chapter, or there is a considerable amount of detail over the topic of sins and the impact of sins upon a person, the impact of sins upon the society, the impact of sins upon the hearts. And so that is the section we want to have a look at, to examine what these impacts are, to realize the severity of them, and as a consequence understand the importance of staying away from them in order to rectify society. Because if sins corrupt society, then what is the means to the rectification of society? The opposite of sins, to abandon sins and to be upon obedience and worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn al-Qayyim, he says, وَلِلْمَعَاصِي مِنَ الْآثَارِ الْقَبِيحَةِ الْمَذْمُومَةِ وَالْمُضِرَّةِ بالقلب والبدن في الدنيا والآخرة ما لا يعلمه إلا الله. That sinning has impacts or consequences, evil and dispraiseworthy and harmful. Evil, dispraiseworthy and harmful impacts and consequences upon the heart and upon the body in this world and in the afterlife, to a level that nobody except Allah knows. Ibn al-Qayyim is highlighting the severity of sins, the severity of their consequences and their impact upon the heart and the body of a person. Those consequences that are evil, those consequences that are dispraiseworthy, degraded, those consequences that are harmful upon the heart of a person and the body of a person. فَمِنْهَا, so from amongst the types of evil consequences of sinning, minha, firstly, hirmanul ilm, deprivation from knowledge, that you be deprived from knowledge as a consequence and an impact of sinning. It deprives a person of knowledge. فَإِنَّ الْعِلْمَ نُورٌ يَقْذِفُهُ اللَّهُ فِي الْقَلْبِ For indeed knowledge is light that Allah casts into the heart. وَالْمَعْصِيَةِ تُطْفِئُ ذَلِكَ النُّورِ. But sins, they extinguish that light. Knowledge is a light that Allah casts into the heart of a person. But sinning, the act of sinning, sins, they extinguish that light. And so Ibn al-Qayyim is giving that example to highlight one of the evil impacts of sins, that they are a means or a cause of deprivation from knowledge. ولما جلس الإمام الشافعي بين يدي مالك وقرأ عليه أعجبه ما رأى من وفور فطنته وتوقد ذكائه وكمال فهمه، فقال: إني أرى الله قد ألقى على قلبك نورا فلا تطفئه بظلمة المعصية. It's mentioned that when Al-Imam Al-Shafi'i sat before Al-Imam Malik and he read upon him, that Al-Imam Malik was impressed and pleased by that which he saw from the sharpness and the ability and the smartness and understanding of Al-Imam Shafi'i. So he said to him, indeed I see that Allah has cast a light into your heart. This knowledge and understanding and ability and comprehension, I see that Allah has cast a light into your heart. So do not extinguish it with sinning. Do not extinguish it with sinning. And then they have that famous line of poetry which is attributed to Al-Imam Shafi'i, attributed to him, where it mentions شكوت إلى وكيع سوء حفظي فأرشدني إلى ترك المعاصي وقال اعلم بأن العلم فضل وفضل الله لا يؤتاه عاصي. Where he mentions that I was complaining to Waki' regarding the weakness of my memorization, my ability. So he guided me to, he directed me to abandoning sinning. And he said, no, that knowledge is a virtue, and the virtue of Allah is not given to a sinner. Knowledge is a virtue, and this virtue from Allah is not given to a sinner. Here, in the explanation of that section, Shaykh al-Fawzan comments on it. So when Ibn al-Qayyim said, فَمِنْهَا حِرْمَانُ الْعِلْمِ, from the impacts of sinning is the deprivation of knowledge, being deprived of knowledge. Shaykh al-Fawzan said, بِسَبَبِ الْمَعَاصِي يُحْرَمُ صَاحِبُهَا مِنَ الْعِلْمِ النَّافِعِ. Due to sinning, the person is deprived of beneficial knowledge. لأن العلم نور وهذا النور إنما يحصل أو يحصل لأهل الإيمان وأهل الطاعة. That this knowledge is light, and that light is only obtained by the people of Iman and the people of obedience. Those who are upon Iman and obedience, they obtain, they achieve this light. But as for Ahlul Ma'asi, the sinners, then they do not obtain this light. وَإِن تَعَلَّمُوا بِأَلْسِنَتِهِمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ يُحْرَمُونَ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ فِي الْقُلُوبِ. the sinners, even if they are learning, even if they are doing it and studying, the reality is they will be deprived of the reality of that knowledge from their hearts. لأن العلم قسمان, because knowledge is two types. قسم على الألسنة, one type which is upon the tongues, one type of knowledge that is upon the tongues. وهذا يكون مع المنافقين وأهل الضلال بل ويكون مع الكفار أيضا. That type of knowledge upon the tongues, then that is something which occurs with the hypocrites even. That the hypocrites have it upon their tongues and they can speak and they can say. And the people of misguidance, they upon their tongues can talk and speak and claim knowledge and present knowledge. Upon their tongues they may do so. Even the Shaykh says the kuffar, even the kuffar upon their tongues may present and put forth knowledge to you. In fact, some of the books in the Islamic library, perhaps upstairs in the library of the masjid too, there are books used by the scholars these days, some of them that were compiled by the mustashriqeen. They were compiled by kuffar, books that they had compiled, research and study that they had done in order to use that to refute Islam. So they had made books with indexes and contents and organized hadith, so they could have easy access to information to refute Islam. Big books, categorized and hadith and everything in order. Then afterwards, the scholars, when they saw these books, all the hadith, mashallah, categorized contents and everything in order and different types of chapters with those books are now used. We use those books. You have them in your libraries. You get the beginning of the hadith. It tells you where this hadith is. Find the beginning of it. It will tell you the hadith is in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. The hadith is in this book, in that book. A very useful and beneficial book. Originated from the kuffar, some of them. So the point is here, this knowledge upon the tongues, that is something the hypocrites can present to you. That is something the people of misguidance can present to you. That is something the kuffar could even present to you. This superficial type of knowledge upon the tongues. But then, ilm bil qulub, the category, the other category, the knowledge in the hearts, then that la yu'tahu illa ahlul iman. That is not given to anyone other than the people of iman, wa ahlul yaqeen, and those who are upon certainty in belief, wa ahlul khashyah, those who are upon that submission and awe and fearing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. الذين قال الله عز وجل فيهم, those whom Allah the Mighty and Majestic said regarding, إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء, that indeed those who truly fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from His servants are the ones with knowledge. Al-ulama, the scholars, the people with knowledge, the people of iman, the people of understanding. Shaykh al-Fawzan says, هذا هو العلم النافع. That is the beneficial knowledge. So you have superficial knowledge upon the tongue that anybody could give you. But the reality of the knowledge in the hearts, with iman and certainty, that knowledge in your hearts is only for the people of iman. Kuffar and their likes do not have that light of knowledge within the hearts. ومن ذلك هذه الأبيات المذكورة عن الإمام الشافعي رحمه الله قال شكوت إلى وكيع سوء حفظي. You have these lines of poetry that Ibn al-Qayyim quoted here, that Al-Imam Shafi'i said he complained to Waki'. And Waki' huwa shaykhun min mashayikh al-Imam Shafi'i. Waki' one of the scholars, one of the teachers of Al-Imam Shafi'i. So Al-Imam Shafi'i said he went and complained to Waki' regarding that weakness of memory. And he had said to him, it is because this knowledge is a virtue from Allah, and that virtue of Allah will not be given to a sinner. So he directed him to abandoning sins in order to improve and strengthen his memorization, his ability. And that is from the advice of the scholars too. It's a very common question. You hear it all the time. When brothers, they ask, how can I improve my memorization? How can I become stronger in my ability to memorize? A common question that scholars are asked often too. And in their answer, within their answers, will always be this point somewhere. The point of abandoning your sins. That will be in their answer often, you see. You want to improve your ability with knowledge, you want to improve your ability with memorization, then abandon sinning and disobedience against Allah. It is a virtue, this knowledge, it is a light that is cast into the heart of a person, and so it will not be cast into the heart of a sinner. وَقَدْ كَانَ رَحِمَهُ اللَّهُ يجلس يتلقى العلم على الإمام مالك رحمه الله. Al-Imam Shafi'i used to sit with Al-Imam Malik, seeking knowledge from him. Al-Imam Malik, as you're aware, came before Al-Imam Shafi'i in the four famous madhahib, as it's known as, the four famous schools of thought. The first of them was in order of when they died. The eldest or the first to die amongst them was Al-Imam Abu Hanifa, and he died in the year 150 Hijri, and was born in the year 80 Hijri. That's why with Al-Imam Abu Hanifa there is a discussion. Did he meet any of the companions or not? Because when he was born, there were still companions alive. But the scholars, they say he did not meet any of the companions. So he was the first to die, and then it was Al-Imam Malik in the year 179. And then it was Al-Imam Shafi'i in the year 204. In the year 204. So Al-Imam Malik died in 179. Al-Imam Shafi'i died 26 or 25 years later, 204. And that was the same year that Al-Imam, somebody was born. Al-Imam Ahmad was born that year. Al-Imam Muslim. Al-Imam Muslim was born in 204, and Al-Imam Shafi'i died in 204. And then the last of them to die was Al-Imam Ahmad in 241. So it mentions here that Al-Imam Shafi'i therefore used to sit with Al-Imam Malik seeking knowledge from him. فكان يجلس يتلقى العلم على الإمام مالك رحمه الله ويروي عنه الموطأ. And Al-Imam Shafi'i used to narrate Al-Muwatta from Al-Imam Malik. Al-Muwatta, the famous book of Al-Imam Malik. فكان يحفظ ما يسمع بسرعة. And it's mentioned how Al-Imam Shafi'i, when studying with Al-Imam Malik, used to memorize quickly. Quickly he used to memorize it all. وَكَانَ شَابًا صَغِيرًا. And at that time he was a youth at that time. فَتَعَجَّبَ مِنْهُ شَيْخُهُ الْإِمَامُ مَالِكِ. So Al-Imam Malik was highly impressed. He was highly impressed with what he saw from Al-Imam Shafi'i and his ability in fast memorization. فَأَوْصَاهُ بِهَذِهِ الْوَصِيَّةِ. So then Al-Imam Malik gave him this advice. إِنِّي أَرَى اللَّهَ قَدْ أَلْقَى عَلَى قَلْبِكَ نُورًا فَلَا تُطْفِئْهُ بِظُلْمَةِ الْمَعْصِيَةِ. That indeed I see Allah has cast upon your heart a light. So do not extinguish it with the darkness of sinning. I see Allah has cast upon you a light, so do not distinguish it with the darkness of sins. So that is the first point he mentions regarding the evil consequences of sinning. It deprives you of knowledge. How is that connected to the theme that we are discussing in this conference? The theme which is protecting yourselves, community, societies in these challenging times. If we are deprived of knowledge because we are committing all of these sins, then a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding and a prevalence of ignorance, is that going to do anything to protect us in society? Is that going to do anything to rectify our society? So if we want protection for ourselves, our families, we want rectification in society, then know about the impact of this. Sinning, it causes, as one of its causes, a deprivation of knowledge. If you have a deprivation of knowledge because the community are sinners, then you are going to be deprived in your affairs of the religion, deprived in your ability to practice your religion properly, deprived in your ability to build your communities and societies because of the overwhelming sinning that has taken over, and therefore deprived the communities of knowledge and understanding, and that is only going to bring harm. It is not going to bring goodness for that community. The second point from the consequences of sinning, وَمِنْهَا حِرْمَانُ الرِّزْقِ, that sinning, it causes a deprivation in rizq, in your provisions. In your provisions, they are depleted as a consequence of sinning. وفي المسند إن العبد ليحرم الرزق بالذنب يصيبه. It is mentioned in Al-Musnad. What is Al-Musnad? There are many books known as Al-Musnad. Which one is this one? How do you know? It doesn't say, it just says Fil Musnad. And there are many books known as Al-Musnad. How do we know this one is the Musnad of Al-Imam Ahmad? So it could be any then.
Generally known. One that's generally known.
There is a principle like that, or not principle, but it's something which is understood. there are certain titles that are understood and they are prevalent. It is the default. It is almost like istilah. If you say the musnad, the default is the musnad of Al-Imam Ahmad. That's the default. And there are many others. But the default, if you hear a scholar say, Fil Musnad, there are many books which are musnad this, musnad that, musnad this, many. But the default, when you hear somebody say, Wa fil Musnad, they are referring to the musnad of Al-Imam Ahmad. It mentions there, indeed a servant is deprived of provision because of a sin that he committed. That indeed a servant is deprived of provisions because of a sin that he committed. وَكَمَا, this is all Ibn al-Qayyim. وَكَمَا أَنَّ تَقْوَى اللَّهِ مَجْلَبَةٌ لِلرِّزْقِ فَتَرْكُ التَّقْوَى مَجْلَبَةٌ لِلْفَقْرِ فَمَا اسْتُجْلِبَ رِزْقُ اللَّهِ بِمِثْلِ تَرْكِ الْمَعَاصِي. So just like taqwa, it brings about your provision. It is a means of attaining provision. Then abandonment of taqwa, not having taqwa, it will therefore do the opposite. It will bring upon you poverty. Having taqwa of Allah, which means fulfilling the commandments of Allah upon light, upon knowledge, desiring the reward from Allah, and staying away from the sins and the wrongs upon knowledge, fearing the punishment of Allah. Taqwa, when you have that, it is a means of bringing rizq to you. But when you abandon it, then the opposite, the rizq does not come and therefore you are in poverty. And then Ibn al-Qayyim says, there is nothing better that causes for the rizq to come your way other than or similar to the abandonment of sins. Abandon sinning, and that is from the greatest method of rizq coming your way. But you do not abandon sinning and you persist upon that, then that is from the means of depriving you of rizq, and instead therefore being upon poverty. So in this one, Shaykh al-Fawzan says, وَمِنْ آثَارِ الْمَعَاصِي أَنْ يُحْرَمَ الْعَاصِي الرِّزْقِ. From the consequences of sinning is that a person is deprived of sustenance, of provisions, just like in this narration, إِنَّ الْعَبْدَ لَيُحْرَمُ الرِّزْقَ بِذَنْبٍ أو بِالذَّنْبِ يُصِيبُهُ. That maybe a servant is deprived of provisions because of a sin that he commits. And then Shaykh al-Fawzan says, وَقَوْلُهُ, قول Ibn al-Qayyim, تَقْوَى اللَّهِ مَجْلَبَةٌ لِلرِّزْقِ. That having the taqwa of Allah, it brings about provision for you. كَمَا فِي قَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى. Just like it is mentioned in the statement of Allah, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. That whomsoever has the taqwa of Allah, then Allah will make him a way out from whatever that affair may be, whatever that difficulty may be, whatever that situation may be. Whomsoever has the taqwa of Allah, then Allah will make him a way out from that and will provide him with sustenance, with provisions, from where he does not even expect. Provisions will come to him from where he had not even anticipated. He had not even anticipated for those provisions to come from here or from there. But the one who has the taqwa of Allah, then those provisions, they come to him from this place and from that place, a place where he had not even anticipated or expected. فَتَقْوَى اللَّهِ سَبَبٌ لِلْخُرُوجِ مِنَ الشَّدَائِدِ. So having the taqwa of Allah is a means of extracting oneself, or that Allah extracts a person from difficulties due to your taqwa. That you have taqwa of Allah is a means for you to be extracted from difficulties. وَسَبَبٌ لِجَلْبِ الرِّزْقِ. And it is a cause for the provisions to be brought your way. وَالْمَعْصِيَةِ بِالْعَكْسِ. And sinning is the opposite. Sinning is a means for you to remain in difficulty. And sinning is a means for you to not have the provisions come your way, and instead to be upon poverty. وَقَوْلُهُ, again the statement of Ibn al-Qayyim, فَتَرْكُ التَّقْوَى مَجْلَبَةٌ لِلْفَقْرِ. Abandoning taqwa, it is a means of poverty overcoming you. As Shaykh al-Fawzan says, فَإِن قِيلَ, that if it was said, أَنْتُمْ تَقُولُونَ هَذَا, that here you are saying this, a person who doesn't have taqwa, then the provision doesn't come his way, he'll be upon poverty. If somebody says that's what you're claiming, فَمَا بَالُ الْكُفَّارِ بِأَيْدِيهِمْ أَمْوَالٌ وَقُوَّةٌ وَهُمْ كُفَّارٌ. Then how come the disbelievers, kuffar, without taqwa, have wealth and they have strength and power? They have all that provision, all of that wealth, all of that strength. Many of the kuffar, how are they getting that then? If you're saying it is taqwa which brings that to a person, and they of course do not have any taqwa, so how are they receiving all of that? فَنَقُولُ لَهُمْ, so we say to them, الكفار يستدرجون وهذا استدراج من الله سبحانه وتعالى لهم. We say that this is istidraj for the kuffar, that essentially they are being given that as a means which increases them further upon misguidance, upon their kufr, upon their path to destruction. It is something which is there for them, increasing them slowly without them even realizing towards more and more destruction. They're chasing after the world, chasing after wealth, gathering of all of these luxuries. It is not going to bring them any good result. For them, having all of that is only step by step taking them into destruction. So nobody can say, why have they been given this? They've been given that for another reasoning behind it. The reasoning of providing that step by step process leading them further into their destruction. وَأَمَّا مَا يُعْطَاهُ أَهْلُ الْإِيمَانِ فَإِنَّمَا هُوَ إِعَانَةٌ لَهُمْ عَلَى طَاعَةِ اللَّهِ. As for what the people of Iman are given from their provisions and their sustenance, they are given it for a completely different reason. They are given that rizq as a means to aid them upon obedience to Allah, as a means to aid them further towards the pleasure of Allah, towards entering paradise by the mercy of Allah. So when the believers gain this provision by having the taqwa, then that provision for them is an aid for them to help them in their obedience of Allah, in their worship, and therefore to the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas the kuffar who gain that provision even without taqwa, they've been given it for a different reason altogether. They've been given it as a means slowly taking them further into destruction. So there is no comparison of saying, but why are they getting it if they have no taqwa? They are getting it for a completely different reason. Here we're talking about the believers gaining this rizq via taqwa of Allah. That rizq which aids you in fulfilling the rights of Allah, in therefore being upon the obedience to Allah, fulfilling the commandments and staying away from the prohibitions. So, أما ما يعطاه أهل الإيمان فإنما هو إعانة لهم على طاعة الله وجزاء لهم على تقواهم وإحسانهم أو على تقواهم وإحسانهم. So as for what the believers are given, they are given that in order to aid them upon the obedience to Allah, and as a recompense, as a good recompense for them upon their taqwa that they had and upon the righteousness that they were on, then Allah bestows upon them this rizq. فَفَرْقٌ بَيْنَ الْعَطَائَيْنِ. So there is a big difference between what the two have been given, what the believers have been given and what the non-believers have been given. عطاء أهل الإيمان وعطاء أهل الكفر. What the people of Iman have been given is one thing different altogether from what the people of disbelief, the kuffar, have been given. وكذلك, and then Al-Imam Ibn Al-Qayyim says, the third thing that you also discover or realize as a consequence of sinning, منها وحشة يجدها العاصي في قلبه بينه وبين الله لا توازنها ولا تقارنها لذة أصلا ولو اجتمعت له لذات الدنيا بأسرها لم تقف بتلك أو لم تفي بتلك الوحشة وهذا أمر لا يحس به إلا من في قلبه حياة وما لجرح بميت إيلام. Ibn al-Qayyim then says another one of the consequences is a type of desertion, a type of isolation and desertion. I think desertion is a word. To have the feeling of being alone, deserted, isolated. You have those feelings in your heart, the one who commits sins. The feeling of being isolated and not connected to your Lord. The feeling of that desertion, to be upon that state of desertion, separation, without that connection to your Lord, then this is something that the sinner also experiences. And no matter what he does and gains from the world, no matter what luxuries you pick up, none of those are going to fulfill this void. None of those luxuries of the world will fill this void that the person who sins experiences in his heart. You have a hole in your heart from that sinning. No matter what you go after in the world, no matter what luxuries you gather, they will never fill this hole in your heart that you have between yourself and your Lord, this isolation, this breakage, that cannot be filled by whatever you attempt to fill it with the glitters of the world. Hence we have so many narrations in the Sunnah that speak about this type of affair. When the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, كن في الدنيا كأنك غريب أو عابر سبيل, be in this world as though you are a stranger or a passerby. What is a stranger? The gharib, it is a person who is not in his natural environment, not in his homeland. You are a stranger somewhere. It is not your base. It is not your homeland. So the Prophet ﷺ told us to be like strangers. Shaykh al-Fawzan, he said, a stranger, the gharib, كن في الدنيا كأنك غريب, the gharib, a stranger, is a person who is away from his family, away from his home, away from his land, somewhere strange, somewhere where he doesn't belong. So what does the stranger who is in that situation always want to do? He eventually, whenever he can, wants to get back to his family, back to his homeland, back to his people. That's a stranger. Abiru Sabil, a traveler, a wayfarer. Somebody who is a traveler is therefore also away from his homeland, his people, his land. So therefore that traveler and wayfarer also eventually wants to get back to his base, his land, his people. So why is the Prophet ﷺ telling us in the narration, be like strangers or wayfarers, travelers, meaning be in this world like you are not resident and like this world is not your homeland. Do not be in this world like it is your homeland. Do not be in this world like you are with your family and land and people and this is your residence. Rather, as Shaykh al-Fawzan said, initially Adam alayhi salam was in paradise. Which paradise? That's another discussion. But paradise. Then after that, mankind came to this world. So where was the original home? Paradise. This world was a secondary home that Adam was then transferred to. So Shaykh al-Fawzan, he mentioned all of us now, mankind, we are like travelers or strangers here, yearning to get back to the original home, which was paradise. Hence, be in this world like you're just a stranger passing through 10, 20, 50, 80 years and you're gone. A traveler, 10, 20, 80 years, you're gone. Back to the original abode. Meaning, therefore, this world is not for you to go and gather the luxuries of. It is not for you to become settled as though you will live here forever. Rather, you take what you need and you pass through. The point here Ibn al-Qayyim was making, that a person who sins, no matter how much he goes after the world even, and gathers whatever he gathers, a yacht worth 5 million, 10 million, it still surprises me when I hear these things. These yachts worth 5 million and 10 million and 20 million, and it's a boat. These things, no matter what a person gathers, it will never fill the void, the vacuum, the vacancy, the hole that a person is left with from the impact of the sins on his heart. So now if you have a community and a society that is upon sinning, and it is widespread amongst them, then this is the state of the hearts of that society. This is what those individuals will be upon. So how are you going to protect yourselves and your families and rectify if these sins are impacting upon your hearts in that way? We need our hearts to be full, to be connected. As Ibn al-Qayyim or Ibn Taymiyyah, one of them, they mention the example, the heart of a believer that is connected to Allah upon the dhikr and remembrance of Allah, it is like a fish inside of water. If you take the water away from the fish, what will be the state of that fish? Of course, we all know the state of a fish if you take it away from water. Ibn al-Qayyim or Ibn Taymiyyah, one of them, they mention this is the state of a person if you take away the remembrance of Allah from his heart. You take away the remembrance of Allah from the heart of a believer, it is like taking away water from the fish. How that fish would struggle without water, this is how the believer and his heart are trembling and struggling if you are not upon the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, وَلَوْ اجْتَمَعَتْ لَهُ لَذَّاتُ الدُّنْيَا بِأَسْرِهَا لَمْ تَفِ بِتِلْكَ الْوَحْشَةِ وَهَذَا أَمْرٌ لَا يَحِسُّ بِهِ إِلَّا مَنْ فِي قَلْبِهِ حَيَاةٌ وَمَا لِجُرْحٍ بِمَيِّتٍ إِيلَامٍ. And then he says, this is something that really only a person who has life in his heart will understand. Meaning a person who is dead in his heart, then the sins and the void and the all of that, it's like it doesn't really register for them. The one who is dead in his heart, it will not register for them. But the one who has life in his heart, then it will certainly register. But as for the dead one, then like they say, somebody who is dead, no amount of injury or wounds thereafter will cause any pain. If somebody is dead, any injury afterwards, any wound afterwards will not cause them any pain. They're already dead. So as for the one whose heart is already in that state, then they will not experience and register for them the severity of this. And that's what happens when a person begins sinning. It begins maybe small, just like Al-Imam Al-Barbahari mentioned about bid'ah in Sharh Al-Sunnah, that a person begins with a small bid'ah, something small that doesn't really register on their scale. It's a tiny thing, it's a minor thing. Then that minor thing becomes a bit bigger, but it doesn't really register. Then it starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it completely covers up that person and swallows him. But it hasn't registered for you because gradually it's crept up on you. It's like the example you see right from the beginning of how shirk began. 10 generations بين آدم ونوح عليهما السلام 10 قرون كلهم على التوحيد. Like in the narration of Al-Bukhari of Ibn Abbas, 10 generations, all of them upon Tawheed. If Shaitan came straight away and said commit shirk, it would not work like this. 10 generations upon Tawheed. So what did the Shaitan do? Take steps. First a small step, then a bigger, then a bigger, then a bigger, until eventually shirk. First step, go and remember them. They were righteous people, awliya of Allah. Go to their graves. Next step, stay there, ponder, do your i'tikaf at the graves. Next step, bring their idols into your cities. Avoid having to go out and spend all of that time away. Just put their idols and figurines and pictures in amongst their communities. You'll see them and remember them. And then حتى إذا نسي العلم When the generations went by, the next generation came. Eventually now, after all of those steps, the shaitan says to them, these things your forefathers used to call upon them when there was no rain. They used to ask of them when they were in need. So they did not know otherwise, and they began doing that step by step. And this is how sins are. This is how bid'ah is. Begins as something small, it doesn't register. Gets a bit bigger, but it doesn't register because it's slowly increasing. Gets a bit bigger, doesn't register, it's slowly increasing, until it swallows you up and it hasn't registered. It is like any example of something which occurs all of a sudden. You get into your car, turn it on, and the light starts flashing. Fill up, 4 miles to go. If you get into your car and that's the first thing you see, it registers straight away. First thing I need to do is go to a petrol station. But if you've had a full tank and slowly it goes down 1 bar, or it goes down 1 needle, and it goes down 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 into the flashing light, but still it's not the same impact. You carry on, mashallah. No, but it was a full tank, I can go, there must be a bit more yet. And you carry on and you carry on until you break down in the middle of the motorway. But when you get into your car, the first time, turn it on, bleep, bleep, bleep. Low, fill up now, 4 miles to go. First thing you will do is go and fill up. It's the thing about gradual progression. If something gradually progresses upon you, gradually builds upon you, it doesn't register as much. If something hits you in the face, then it registers. With these sins, they slowly build upon you, build and build and build, and they don't register. Whereas if you had begun with the biggest straight away, it would have registered. But the shaitan comes to you building them up slowly. A small one, then a bigger one, then a bigger one, then a bigger one, until he causes a person to go and drink alcohol, causes a person to go and fornicate, and that person initially at the beginning, had you said to them those things, they would have said, Astaghfirullah. Of course not, what are you talking about? But then after months and years of building and building and building, eventually that act occurs and it doesn't register for the person. He slowly progressed onto it. So here he mentions, as a consequence of that sinning, one of the things you will notice, one of the things which will be experienced is that loneliness. That is a word too. The loneliness, the desertion, the isolation, the loneliness, the void that a person will feel in his heart as a consequence of those sins. The last one that we'll do today. وَمِنْهَا تَعْصِيرُ أُمُورِهِ عَلَيْهِ فَلَا يَتَوَجَّهُ لِأَمْرٍ إِلَّا يَجِدُهُ مُغْلَقًا دُونَهُ أو متعصرا عليه وهذا كما أن من اتقى الله جعل له من أمره يسرا فمن عطل التقوى جعل له من أمره عسرا. That the one who sins, one of the impacts of that is that your affairs, your life becomes difficult. Your affairs become difficult. You want to go and do something, you find complication in trying to do it. Difficulty in trying to complete something, to do something. Because, and as a consequence of the situation you are in, because of all the sinning you've been doing, that your path to your affairs, you find it closed and blocked and complicated, and things are just difficult. This is difficult and that's so complicated, and everything in your life becomes twisted and turned. This is something which occurs as a consequence of sinning. That a person, it mentions here, لا يتوجه لأمر إلا يجده مغلقا دونه. That a person doesn't go trying to do something except that he finds it complicated and blocked difficult, confusing. How, what shall I do, where shall I do, can't do it. Becomes difficult for him, his affairs, whatever he tries to do. Because the one who is upon the taqwa of Allah, his affairs are made easy for him. But as for the one who is or neglects the taqwa of Allah, abandons the taqwa of Allah, then he will find difficulty come to him. Shaykh al-Fawzan just adds one point here. He says regarding that point, that when you don't have taqwa and you do sins, it causes your affairs to become difficult and blocked, and you can't seem to do what you're trying to do, and you can't get anywhere in life in what you're trying to do. Shaykh al-Fawzan says what's really severe about that, what is really severe about that situation is al-ashad min dhalika annahu ma yadri ma sabab ta'assur al-umuri alayh. That a person doesn't even comprehend that it's because of all of these sins, these difficulties are occurring. He carries on with his sins and sins and sins, and then why can't I do this, and why is this so difficult, and why isn't that working for me? It doesn't even register. What about all these sins I'm doing? Maybe because of these sins, these difficulties are arising for me. The Shaykh says the severity in this affair is many of them just don't even stop to think and register and realize it's because of all of these sins. Maybe that's what's causing this problem for me. وَقَدْ يُلْقِي بِاللَّوْمِ عَلَى غَيْرِهِ. And instead you hear these people blaming others. It's because of him, and because of that, and because of this, that this didn't work, and that didn't work, and that didn't happen, and I wasn't able to do that because of him, and because he didn't do this, and he was supposed to do that. That's the way they are, in that state of anger, in that state of difficulty, and they never stop to think. All these difficulties may be, reflect upon yourself and look at what you're doing. Perhaps it's my shortcomings that are creating or a cause of these difficulties occurring for me. So that is maybe four examples given so far by Ibn al-Qayyim regarding the evil effects of sins upon a person, upon a community, upon the society. All of those evils there, if you now think about those evils, and if they are prevalent amongst the community, if they are prevalent amongst the people, those types of affairs, then are they going to bring any strength to a people? They will not bring strength to any people. They will bring weakness to a people. And that's why when they talk about these days going out to demonstrate and go to the embassy, and we need to put the banners up in the sky and hold them up outside the embassy, and we need to get signatures, and we need to get 1 million people. All of that, 1 million, 1 billion, and it will not aid them if all of these diseases are prevalent amongst them still. All of them out there as sinners in that day, standing with banners, and no dhuhr, no asr, no nothing, will combine after Maghrib. Because you're stuck in it's an excuse, it's istithna, some reason, some fatwa from somebody, from the European Lajna Da'ima, whatever. Now we have fatwa, you can miss your dhuhr, you can miss your asr, you can miss your maghrib, you can miss your isha because you have to demonstrate. Maybe they give them some fiqh, that the maslahah is a'zam, or anything they'll tell them. And they follow all of these misguidances, and you see the reality of the weakness of the ummah. The ummah is not going to be strengthened with that. The ummah is going to be strengthened by filling in these holes, by getting rid of these sins, by getting rid of disobedience against Allah. So we'll round off on that small section for today, and then tomorrow we have one more session, inshallah. We'll do some more examples and a bit more reading from what Ibn al-Qayyim mentioned, and some of the additions of Shaykh al-Fawzan, inshallah ta'ala. So I think already there's been a couple of lectures today. We'll round off on that for today then. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.